and welcome back to episode 2. In this episode, we will cover 1. What yarn is best to use when crocheting our sweaters for men. 2. The importance of swatching. And 3. The stitches that we will be using to crochet our sweater. So let's begin. What yarn should we use? Compared to the stockinette stitch in knitting, the single crochet stitch is heavier and a little thicker. Because of this, worsted weight yarn or yarn with weight number 4 is not a good choice of yarn. If we use worsted weight yarn, the sweater would be too heavy and the fabric of the sweater would be too thick, making the sweater too hot to wear inside. My heavier sweaters are made with light worsted yarn or yarn number 3. These images show a few of the sweaters that I made using yarn weight number 3. These are the sweaters I wear during the cold winter season. Now, my preferred yarn weight is somewhere 2 and 3. Sock yarn, which is a number 2, sports yarn, which is a number 2.5, decay, which is a number 3, and light worsted, which is a 3.5. I even crocheted sweaters using yarn weight 1. With one sweater, I use 100% wool, and with the other sweater, I use cotton. The sweater made with wool was thin and light, but also kept me warm during the winter. The sweater with cotton feels cool and is perfect for the spring and the fall season. When I went to Michael's, the only yarn that I found that was lighter than worsted weight number 4 yarn, and that also tickled my fancy, was this one. It's from Loops and Threads and it's called Heather Tweed. It's a number 3 weight and it's very soft and a polyester blend. This means that it will retain heat very well as a sweater, so I will probably wear it this winter. I don't have a sweater with this type of color combination, and I'm really curious to see what it's gonna look like. You don't have to choose the same type of yarn that I chose. You can work with yarn weight 2, for example, and you will still be able to follow these tutorials. Because my system does not follow a pattern, but it follows your body measurements. How much yarn should you buy? Take a look at this handy dandy chart. On the left column, you see different project types. What we need is a project type that says adult sweater. To the right of the project type, you see yardage needed depending on the weight of the yarn you will be using. In my specific case, I select the yardage for yarn weight 3. Because my torso is a size large, the amount of yarn I buy for my sweaters falls on the higher number within that range. If you're making a medium-sized sweater, I will go for the middle of the range. If you're making a size small sweater, I will go for the lower number within that range. Swatches, the dreaded swatches. I know that some of you don't like swatching, but I guarantee you it's the absolute most important part of the sweater making process. I don't swatch to achieve gauge. Remember, my system does not follow a pattern. Therefore, there is no gauge to achieve. So, if you don't have to achieve gauge, why do I still need to swatch? Because when you swatch, you begin to actually see how the fabric develops. You also get to see how the colors lay themselves out. When I swatch, I make several swatches, each one using a different hook size. Please do not go with the suggested hook size shown on the yarn label. It is never the right hook size for crocheting sweaters for men. For example, the suggested hook size for the Loop and Threads yarn that I bought for this tutorial is a size K or 6.5 millimeters. When I started crocheting the yoke for the sweater, I could see that something wasn't right. The fabric was way too airy, too kind of wonky. You could actually see through the holes. Also, the stitches looked way too big. It really looked horrible. So I made 4 swatches. Each swatch was made with a different hook size, and when I was done, I started comparing the swatches. The swatch to your left was made with hook size G or 4 millimeters. The swatch next to it was done with hook size 4.5 millimeters. This is a strange hook size because it does not have a corresponding letter. I know, strange, huh? The swatch next to it was made with hook size H or 5 millimeters. And the last swatch, all the way to the right, was made with hook size I or 5.5 millimeters. Both swatches on the right look good. They have good drape and elasticity, but you can easily push your thumb through them, and that is not good. It means that the stitches are too wonky, too airy. There is too much space in between the stitches, basically. The swatches on the left also look good. The stitches are tight, they're orderly, they're small. You cannot easily push your thumb through them, but the smaller swatch does not have much drape. The stitches are too tight, making the fabric dense, and a dense fabric is not a good fabric for sweaters. The other swatch instead has both attributes, tight stitches and good drape, and that is the hook size that I will be using for my sweater. And finally, what stitches are we going to use for our sweater? No, it's not going to be single crochet, and no, it's also not going to be double crochet. Single crochet is too small. A single crochet fabric is dense and has no drape at all. And the double crochet stitch is too tall. There is too much space in between stitches. When you stretch a fabric made of double crochet, you can basically see through it, and that does not make the sweater appealing. So, Fabio, what stitch are we going to use? Well, you already know the answer. It's the stitch that is in between the single and the double crochet, and you already know it's the half double crochet, which is also my favorite stitch. Half double crochet stitch is tighter than the double crochet stitch, but softer than the single crochet stitch, making it a good in-between. But it is still too heavy. Remember, crochet creates a very heavy fabric. Even the half double crochet stitch is too heavy a stitch to make a good sweater. We need to make the stitch lighter. And how do we do that? We use a variation called the half double crochet in the front loop. All of the swatches we saw earlier were made using the half double crochet stitch in the front loop, the variation. Here is a comparison of two swatches, one made using the standard half double crochet stitch and one made using the variation, the half double crochet stitch in the front loop. Immediately you can see that the swatch made with the variation of the half double crochet stitch is taller. This is not because the stitch is taller, but because the stitch stretches the fabric itself, making it a little bit thinner and a little bit taller compared to the traditional half double crochet. Basically, working in the front loop has the effect of stretching the stitch, making the fabric perfect for sweaters. Also notice that the half double crochet stitch in the front loop creates this cute decorative ridge on every row, something you don't see when using the traditional half double crochet stitch. So how do you make that stitch? So in this tutorial, I already have stitched the first row and I am about to start the second row. And I'm gonna do the first stitch, which is gonna be the regular standard half double crochet stitch, and going forward I'm gonna continue the row using the variation or the half double crochet stitch in the front row. So this is the first half double crochet stitch. Notice that everything looks just as it should be. Now the next one would be the variation. So yarn over, and normally you would push your hook through those two loops, and that would make the traditional stitch. Instead, we are going to simply push the hook through the first loop, just like that. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over again, and pull through all of those three loops. Okay, let's go for the next one. Yarn over. Once again, normally you would put the hook through both loops. Our variation there, just like that. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over again, and pull through all of those three loops. Okay, let's go for another one. Not through those two, but only through the first one, first loop or front loop, and then you continue the stitch as usual. And that's how you make a half double crochet stitch in the front loop. Let's go back to the video. Notice that when you turn your work, you see the decorative ridge. If you don't see a ridge in one stitch, it means that you did a traditional half double crochet stitch and you need to go back. But Fabio, you told us that we are gonna cover a second variation, and you're right. The second variation is called the extended half double crochet in the front loop. Why do we need an extended stitch? It's because the neck is not positioned perfectly above our torso, but it's positioned a little bit slanted to the front. When we crochet the top part of the sweater, the back needs to have a taller stitch because it has to cover more distance than the stitch in the front. But Fabio, don't we already have the double crochet stitch? Yes, we do, but I don't like it to begin with. But secondly, the double crochet stitch is a completely different stitch. It has a different anatomy, a different structure. Instead, the extended half double crochet stitch follows the exact same anatomy or structure of the classic half double crochet stitch. And therefore, if you were to put them side by side, you would not notice much of a difference. You would simply notice that it's a little bit taller. I'm going to show you now in the next video how to make the extended half double crochet stitch in the front loop. I just made 2 starting chains because in the next row I'm going to make the extended half double crochet stitch, which is a little bit taller, and that's why I'm starting the row with 2 initial chains and not 1. So yarn over. Remember, my first stitch is through both loops to hold the edge nice and tight. Yarn over, and now at this point you would pull the hook through all the 3 loops, but not with the extended version. Notice that I pulled it through only the first loop, and then I do another yarn over, and only then I pull it through all 3 loops. Now the second stitch, instead, is in the front loop. Pull through only the first, and that makes the extension, and now pull all 3, and now I have the completed stitch. Let's do number 3. Yarn over, through the front loop, pull through, yarn over, only through 1 loop, yarn over again, through all 3 loops. Yarn over, hook through the front loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through only 1 loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. Once again, through the front loop, yarn over, pull through the 1 loop, and then pull through all 3 loops. Okay, so I fast forward the video and I just completed 2 rows of the extended half double crochet stitch in the front loop. Notice how the extended version makes the stitch a little bit taller than the half double crochet stitch in the front loop. But Fabio, didn't you say at the beginning that there's going to be also a bonus stitch? I never start with a foundation chain because, as we all know, foundation chains are tight. But there is a little trick called the foundation half double crochet. It takes care of the foundation chain and the first row. And the result is that you end up with a very elastic first row, basically a perfect crochet first row. Here how I make it. I also never start with a slip knot. I usually position my yarn over my hook in that way. Then I pull through, yarn over, under, pull through. Okay, now this part is very critical. Notice how I'm gonna stop the video right there. Notice how my thumb and the index finger of my left hand pinch that first stitch. Yarn over, and instead of pulling through 3 loops, I only pull through the first loop. Doesn't that remind you of something? Yes, it's very similar to the extended half double crochet stitch. This is kind of like an extended half double crochet stitch, but when you pull through that first loop, you are actually creating the first foundation chain. And then when you yarn over and then you pull through the remaining 3 loops, that's how then you complete this stitch. I'm gonna be quiet here so you can observe. Pinch. And then you continue. And I'm going to fast forward here a little bit. I just completed 20 foundation half double crochet stitches. And look how beautiful the stretch is. So in this episode, we talked about yarn, we talked about swatching, and we talked about the stitches that we will be using. In the next episode, we are actually going to start making the sweater. But until then, I really would like you to go out there, get the yarn, stitch, 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 swatch, 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 and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and ciao.